There are moments in life that carve themselves into your bones, moments where the words spoken by someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally become a permanent echo in the silence of your own mind. I remember the exact texture of the air that evening, the way the kitchen light felt harsh and clinical, the smell of a dinner that had gone cold, and my mother's voice, not raised in anger but lowered into something far more dangerous. A calm, surgical dismissal. She looked at me, her only son, and she said, "You are a failure." That was 5 years ago. Last Tuesday, she got down on her knees and begged me. This is not a story of easy triumph. This is a story of the silent fracture and the long, slow journey back to solid ground. To understand the weight of those words, you have to understand what came before. My mother wasn't always a stranger to me. For the first 22 years of my life, she was my blueprint for the world. My father was a ghost, a faint memory of suitcases and hushed arguments. So it was her and me. She worked 2 jobs, her hands always chapped, her eyes always tired, but she had a smile that could reheat leftover pasta and make it feel like a feast. She'd tell me, "You are going to be the masterpiece of my life. You are going to build something I never could." Our dream was a shared language. I would sit at the foot of her bed and sketch buildings on scrap paper, wild, impossible structures that reached for the clouds. She'd look at them, trace the lines with her finger, and say, "My little architect." That dream, that identity, was the sacred trust between us. I wasn't just her son, I was the vessel for her deferred hopes, the proof that her struggle had a purpose. I carried that dream like a fragile, precious heirloom, terrified of dropping it. Every good grade, every scholarship, every late night studying was an offering laid at the altar of that shared future. She was my first believer, and for the longest time, that belief felt like the only truth that mattered. The betrayal didn't come out of a clear blue sky. It was a slow, creeping pressure, like a crack spreading across ice. I got into a good school for architecture, not the top-tier Ivy League she had secretly pinned her hopes on, but a strong, respectable state university with a great program. I saw it as a victory. She saw it as a compromise. The first fissure. Then, the reality of the coursework hit me. It was a brutal, demanding beast. The physics of structures, the endless history, the software that felt like learning a new alphabet every week. My sketches, once praised for their creativity, were now critiqued for impracticality. I struggled. I pulled all-nighters, my eyes burning, my back aching from hunching over drafting tables. My grades were average, B's and C's, not the sterling A's of her fantasy. The calls home became shorter. Her questions grew more pointed. "Are you even trying?" she'd ask, the warmth leaching from her voice. "Do you know how much I'm sacrificing?" The shared language was breaking down into static. Then, in my 3rd year, I failed a core studio class. Not just a bad grade, a full catastrophic failure. The project, a complex design for a community center, was deemed structurally unsound and aesthetically derivative by a professor known for his ruthlessness. I was devastated. I was exhausted. I felt the dream, that fragile heirloom, slipping through my fingers. I drove home that weekend, not for comfort, but because I felt I owed her the truth in person. I needed to see her face. I needed her to tell me it was going to be okay. That brings us back to the kitchen. The cold dinner. I sat there, my hands shaking under the table, and I told her. I laid out the failure, the exhaustion, the creeping doubt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't cut out for this. I was raw. I was confessing. I was, for the first time, showing her the cracks in the vessel she had built. She listened in utter silence. She didn't move. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. And when I finished, when the last broken syllable left my lips, she took a slow sip of her tea, placed the cup down with a precise click, and looked at me. Not with anger, not with disappointment, with a cold, terrifying clarity. "So," she said, her voice flat, "it's true." She paused, letting the words hang. "All these years, all my work, all the nights I went without, so you could have textbooks. For this." She shook her head, a slow, final movement. "I see it now. I was blind. You don't have the drive. You don't have the spine. You're just like your father. All talk, no follow through." My heart was pounding in my ears. "Mom, I just need to reassess. Maybe take a semester." She cut me off. "Reassess?" A bitter, mirthless laugh escaped her. "What is there to reassess? The evidence is in. You failed. You are a failure." She said it not as an insult, but as a diagnosis, a final, clinical pronouncement. "Maybe you should just come home. Get a job at the warehouse with your uncle. At least you'll be useful for something." In that moment, the blueprint of my world dissolved. The person who had authored my sense of self had just declared the manuscript null and void. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood up, walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and drove back to my apartment in a silence so complete it was deafening. What followed was the emotional low, a deep, abyssal plain of quiet. I didn't rage. I didn't make dramatic declarations. I simply shut down. I withdrew from university. I stopped answering her calls, which grew from angry to concerned to finally silent. I got a job as a nighttime stock clerk at a home improvement store. It was mindless, physical work. Lift, stack, repeat. The silence was my companion. I would come home at dawn, my body aching, and stare at the blank wall of my studio apartment. Her words played on a loop. "You are a failure." They weren't just words anymore, they were an identity I had been issued. I wore it like a lead coat. I cut off friends who asked what happened. I disappeared from social media. I became a ghost in my own life. For months, I simply existed in that numbness. The pain wasn't a sharp sting, it was a constant, heavy gravity, pulling everything inward. I thought that was it, that my story had reached its conclusion on that kitchen floor, and the rest was just footnotes. But somewhere, in the deepest, most stubborn part of me, a tiny, defiant ember refused to be extinguished. It wasn't a flame of ambition or a desire for revenge. It was simpler, more primal. It was the refusal to let her diagnosis be the final word. It was the quiet, stubborn thought, what if she's wrong? Not for her, not to prove anything to her, but for me, to see if there was anything left of the person I was before those words were spoken. The revenge, if you can even call it that, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a slow, meticulous rebuild, and it started not with architecture, but with wood. At the home improvement store, I was surrounded by raw materials, lumber, plywood, tools. During my breaks, instead of sitting in the break room, I'd wander the aisles. I'd feel the grain of the oak, the smooth surface of maple. One day, a customer asked for a simple wooden planter bar. The request was simple, but something clicked. I bought some scrap pine, a basic saw, a hammer, and nails. In my empty apartment with the dawn light filtering in, I built it. It was crude, it was wobbly, but I had made it. My hands had taken an idea and given it form. That small physical act, it was a crack in the silence. I built another, then a small side table. With each project, the numbness receded, millimeter by millimeter. I devoured YouTube tutorials on joinery, on finishes. I spent my meager paychecks on better tools, second-hand, one at a time. I was not an architect. I was a carpenter, a maker. And in the making, I found a voice that didn't need anyone's approval. About a year into this, a coworker saw the coffee table I'd refinished and asked if I could make one for her. Then her friend asked. I started taking small commissions. My apartment became a workshop filled with the smell of sawdust and polyurethane. It was messy. It was real. I saved every penny. 2 years after the kitchen, I rented a small leaky garage unit, the grain workshop. It was just me, but it was mine. I wasn't building skyscrapers. I was building custom furniture, restoring heirlooms, creating tangible, useful beauty. My clientele grew not through advertising but through word of mouth. People valued my work. They praised my eye for detail, my patience, the lead coat of failure. It was still there, but it felt lighter. I had built a new self, plank by careful plank, outside the shadow of her dream. The karma, the cosmic realignment, happened in the most mundane way. It was a Thursday, 5 years almost to the day from the kitchen. My business was stable. I had 2 part-time employees. The garage was now a proper, if small, workshop. I was at peace, or something close to it. I was sounding a walnut tabletop, the rhythmic swish, swish, a kind of meditation, when my personal phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but with my hometown's area code, I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. And again. Finally, I wiped my hands and answered. It was my aunt, my mother's sister. Her voice was tight, strained. You need to come. It's your mother. She's in a bad way. She explained. My mother had been diagnosed with a severe degenerative illness. The medical bills, even with insurance, were catastrophic. She had remortgaged her house. She had drained her retirement. She was facing not just a physical decline, but the utter loss of the home she had worked her entire life to keep, the same home she had told me to leave. My aunt's voice broke. She's too proud to ask, but I'm not. We don't know where else to turn. I listened. I felt nothing at first. Then a deep, profound stillness. I told my aunt I would think about it and ended the call. I didn't drive down that night. I waited a week. I finished the walnut table. I shipped it to the client. I balanced my books. And then I got in my car. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. It looked smaller, shabbier. The garden was overgrown. I knocked on the door. My aunt opened it, her eyes wide with surprise and relief, and stepped aside. And there, in the living room, in the same chair she'd always sat in, was my mother. She looked frail. The indomitable strength was gone, replaced by a tangible fear. The years had been kinder to me and harsher to her. We looked at each other across a canyon of silence and time. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness first, but of sheer, overwhelming shame. And then she did what I could have never in 1,000 lifetimes imagined. She slid slowly from the chair, down onto the worn living room carpet, and she knelt. She clasped her hands together as if in prayer. Her voice, once so cold and sure, was a shattered whisper. Please, she begged. I have nowhere else to go. I was wrong. I was so wrong about you. I was cruel. I am so sorry. Please, please help me. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I stood there looking down at the woman who gave me life, and then tried to define its limits. I felt no vengeance, no hot rush of triumph, just a vast, echoing pity. The revenge was complete in that moment, not because she was begging, but because her words had lost all their power over me. Her diagnosis was irrelevant. Her approval was unnecessary. I was no longer the character in her story. I was the author of my own. I did help her, not because she was my mother, but because I am not her. I am the person the silence and the sawdust forged. I worked with my aunt to sell the house, pay off the debts, and find her a good, supported living facility where she could get the care she needed. I covered the shortfall. It was a significant sum, but it was just money. Money I had earned with my own 2 hands. building things she never believed I could. I visit her once a month. We don't talk about the past. We make small, careful talk about the weather, the food, the other residents. There is no grand reconciliation. There is a fragile, cautious truth. The moral of this story isn't that success is the best revenge. It's that the most profound power you will ever wield is the power to define yourself after someone else has tried to break the definition. The journey from "you are a failure" to hearing those words as mere sound, empty of meaning, is the longest journey you will ever take. It is a journey you must take alone, through the silent lowlands of your own pain, and into the quiet, steady work of building something true. Her begging was not my victory lap. It was simply evidence that her reality had finally collided with mine. And mine was built on a foundation she could never break. So if you are hearing a similar echo today, if someone's verdict is ringing in your ears, know this. Their words are just the starting point of your story, not the end. Walk into the silence, pick up your tools, whatever they may be, and build, plank by plank, day by day, until the only voice that matters is your own.